Imagine walking into a restaurant to celebrate a special family night, only to be told you're not welcome. Humiliated, you prepare to leave. But within minutes, the entire story takes a shocking turn, and the family everyone ignored ends up owning the very restaurant that tried to shut them out. How did it happen? Stay tuned because this story is one twist after another. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories. The doors of the restaurant chimed softly as James Carter held it open for his wife, Evelyn, and their 2 children. Their smiles were warm, their laughter light as they entered the upscale dining establishment for what was meant to be a celebration of their wedding anniversary. James wore a tailored suit, and Evelyn's dress sparkled under the dim, ambient lighting of the restaurant. The children, a boy and a girl, followed closely, their faces glowing with excitement. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations, the clink of silverware against plates, and the occasional laughter from diners enjoying their evening. James approached the hostess stand, his voice polite as he greeted the young woman behind it. "Good evening. We have a reservation under Carter for 4. The hostess glanced at her list, her face neutral before hesitating for a moment. Her eyes shifted to someone standing nearby, a tall, sharply dressed man with a clipboard and an air of authority. He walked over briskly, his sharp gaze landing on James and his family before offering a thin, forced smile. "Good evening," the man said, his tone clipped. "I'm Greg Whitman, the manager here. Unfortunately, there seems to have been a mistake with your reservation. We're fully booked tonight." James frowned, confused, but his tone remained calm. "That's strange. I confirmed the reservation myself this morning. There are plenty of empty tables here. Perhaps you could double-check?" Greg's smile tightened as he shook his head. "I assure you, sir, there are no available tables." His eyes flickered to Evelyn, then back to James, his demeanor growing colder. "We run a very exclusive establishment. Perhaps another restaurant might better suit your needs." Evelyn's smile faltered as an uneasy silence settled over their family. The children glanced nervously at each other, sensing the tension. James straightened his shoulders, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I see. Thank you for letting us know," he said, his voice firm but polite. He turned to his wife and children. "Let's go." As they walked toward the door, Evelyn whispered softly to James, "What just happened? Why would they turn us away like that?" James gave her a reassuring glance but said nothing, his jaw clenched tightly. Meanwhile, at a nearby table, an older man in a crisp business suit observed the interaction with keen interest. His eyes followed the Carter family as they moved toward the exit, his expression thoughtful. He sipped his drink slowly, his mind already turning over what he had just witnessed. As James reached for the door to leave, a soft yet firm voice called out from one of the tables near the corner. "Excuse me," the man in the business suit said, setting his glass down deliberately. His voice carried an air of authority, cutting through the quiet hum of the restaurant. James turned, his hand pausing on the door handle, and met the man's gaze. Evelyn and the children stopped as well, looking back with curiosity and a hint of unease. The man rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket as he approached. He was tall, with silver streaks in his hair, and carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. As he reached them, his eyes softened, and he offered a warm smile. "Mr. Carter, is it?" he asked, glancing at James. "I couldn't help but notice the situation." James hesitated before nodding. "Yes, I'm James Carter. I'm sorry if we disturbed you." "Not at all," the man replied smoothly, holding out his hand. "My name is Mr. Patterson. I'm actually a frequent guest here, but I must admit I've never seen such an unwelcome reception for any patron, let alone a family as polite as yours." Greg, who had been watching the scene unfold from behind the hostess stand, quickly intervened. "Mr. Patterson," he said with a nervous laugh, "I assure you this is just a misunderstanding. We're simply at capacity tonight." Mr. Patterson turned to Greg, his smile fading into a stern, piercing look. "Is that so?" he asked quietly, his tone carrying an unmistakable edge. Because from where I was sitting, it looked like you just refused service without valid reason. In fact, I counted no less than 4 empty tables when I arrived. Greg stiffened, his face flushing as the nearby diners began murmuring among themselves. Samantha, the young waitress who had been serving Mr. Patterson, stood frozen near the bar, her eyes darting between her boss and the imposing guest. Patterson's gaze didn't waver as he continued. I think it would be wise for you to reconsider your actions before this escalates any further. James, sensing the tension, placed a gentle hand on Mr. Patterson's arm. Thank you, sir, but we don't want to cause trouble. We'll find somewhere else to eat. Mr. Patterson looked at James and gave a faint smile. You're not the ones causing trouble, Mr. Carter. His tone carried a quiet determination as he added, but this isn't something I can let slide. Greg's discomfort was palpable as he fumbled for words. Mr. Patterson, I'm sure you understand. This is a high-demand evening. We've had several walk-ins and that's enough. Mr. Patterson interrupted, his voice calm but firm. You've already said more than necessary. He turned back to James and Evelyn, his expression softening. If you would indulge me for a moment, I'd like to personally ensure that your evening is salvaged. Evelyn glanced at James, unsure. The children clung to their parents, sensing the weight of the moment but not fully understanding the unfolding drama. James nodded cautiously. We appreciate your kindness, Mr. Patterson, but we don't want to inconvenience anyone. Mr. Patterson smiled faintly. The only inconvenience here is watching an injustice unfold and doing nothing about it. Please follow me. Without waiting for Greg's input, Patterson gestured toward a table near the window, one of the best spots in the restaurant. Samantha, still lingering by the bar, caught his eye. Samantha, Patterson called, his voice warm. Would you kindly set this table for the Carter family? Samantha hesitated, glancing nervously at Greg, whose face had turned a deep shade of red. Mr. Patterson, Greg began, his voice rising in an attempt to regain control. This is highly irregular. If you have concerns, we can address them privately, but Patterson's sharp gaze silenced him instantly. You forget yourself, Greg. This is my establishment. Any concerns I have will be addressed immediately, and very publicly if necessary. The murmurs among the diners grew louder, eyes darting between Greg, Patterson, and the Carters. Samantha, emboldened by Patterson's presence, quickly moved to prepare the table, her hands shaking slightly as she placed silverware and menus. Greg stepped back, his jaw clenched tightly, but he remained silent, clearly seething. As Samantha finished setting the table, Patterson turned back to James and Evelyn. Please sit. Tonight your meal is on me. Evelyn looked at James, who gave her a reassuring nod. Thank you, James said quietly as he guided his family to the table. The children's eyes lit up at the elegant setup, their initial nerves beginning to ease. Greg, meanwhile, stormed toward the kitchen, his composure unraveling. Patterson watched him leave, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. He leaned toward James, lowering his voice. I'd like you to enjoy your dinner first, but I'll have a word with you afterward. There's more to this than meets the eye. James raised an eyebrow but didn't question him. As the Carters settled into their seats, the tension in the restaurant didn't dissipate. It shifted. Whispers and stolen glances from other patrons filled the air as Patterson returned to his own table, his eyes briefly meeting Greg's through the kitchen's glass doors. There was no doubt. A storm was brewing. The Carters sat at their table, trying to shake off the tension that still lingered in the air. Evelyn reached for James's hand, squeezing it lightly as their children marveled at the ornate place settings and the flickering candlelight. This is a beautiful table, Evelyn said softly, trying to brighten the mood. James gave her a small smile but remained vigilant, his eyes scanning the room for any further signs of trouble. Samantha approached cautiously, holding a tray of water glasses. Her voice was tentative but kind. Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. I'll be your server tonight. If there's anything I can do to make your evening more comfortable, please don't hesitate to ask. Evelyn smiled at her, sensing the young waitress's unease. Thank you, Samantha. You've already done more than enough. As Samantha poured water into their glasses, she glanced toward the kitchen, where Greg stood fuming, his arms crossed as he whispered furiously to another staff member. Samantha straightened quickly and returned to the bar, avoiding his gaze. Patterson noticed her movement and gave her a reassuring nod, silently urging her to continue her duties. In the kitchen, Greg paced back and forth, his anger boiling over. "Who does he think he is, undermining me like this?" he hissed to the sous chef, who simply nodded and kept his head down. "This is my restaurant to manage, not his playground." "You're making a scene, Greg," the sous chef muttered under his breath, carefully slicing vegetables. "Maybe you should let it go." Greg's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Let it go? That man just humiliated me in front of everyone. And for what? To pander to people who don't even belong here?" His voice rose slightly, but he quickly caught himself, glancing around to make sure no one else heard. "No, this isn't over." Back at the table, James and Evelyn exchanged a quiet glance, both keenly aware that the evening wasn't as settled as it seemed. James leaned in and spoke softly. "Something's off, Ev. Patterson's help is appreciated, but there's more going on here." Evelyn nodded, her gaze drifting toward Patterson, who sat at his table, sipping his wine and observing the restaurant like a chessboard. "Do you think he's being genuine?" she asked cautiously. "I think he is," James replied. "But I also think he's not telling us everything." The children, oblivious to the undercurrents, giggled as they explored the menu. Evelyn smiled at them, her heart softening. Whatever was happening around them, she resolved to keep the evening as normal as possible for their sake. Across the room, Patterson finally stood again, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked toward the kitchen, his expression unreadable. The tension in the restaurant seemed to thicken as he disappeared behind the swinging doors, leaving James and Evelyn to wonder what confrontation was unfolding just out of sight. Behind the swinging doors of the kitchen, Patterson's calm demeanor gave way to a more commanding presence. Greg turned abruptly as Patterson entered, his anger barely contained. "What exactly do you think you're doing barging into my kitchen?" Greg snapped, his tone low but venomous. Patterson closed the door behind him and folded his arms, his expression cool and unflinching. "Your kitchen? That's an interesting choice of words," he said evenly. "Let me remind you, Greg, that everything in this restaurant, including the kitchen, is under my ownership. And right now, what I own is on the verge of being tainted by your unacceptable behavior." Greg scoffed, throwing a towel onto the counter. "Unacceptable? I've been running this place successfully for years. I know what's best for the restaurant. You don't get to walk in here and undermine my authority in front of customers." Patterson took a step closer, his voice lowering but losing none of its intensity. "You think this is about authority? No, Greg. This is about the reputation of this restaurant, which you've put in jeopardy tonight. Discrimination has no place in my business. Your behavior toward the Carter family was not only unethical but entirely out of line." Greg's face twisted in anger. "Discrimination? Don't try to lecture me. I was protecting the image of this restaurant. People like them don't belong here. They don't fit the clientele we're trying to attract." The words hung in the air like a slap, the tension thick enough to cut. Patterson's jaw tightened, his calm exterior cracking just enough to show the anger simmering beneath. "You've just proven my point, Greg," he said, his voice sharp now. "You're not protecting the image of this restaurant. You're destroying it. And you've crossed the line one too many times." Greg's face paled slightly as he realized the weight of Patterson's words. He stepped back, trying to regain control. "You can't be serious. You're not going to throw away years of hard work because of one misunderstanding." Patterson took another step forward, his eyes locking onto Greg's. "It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, calculated choice. And it wasn't your first offense. I've been watching you for months, Greg, hearing complaints from staff and customers alike. Tonight just confirmed what I've suspected all along. You're unfit to represent this establishment." Greg's breath hitched as the gravity of the situation dawned on him. "You're firing me? Over this?" Patterson nodded firmly. "Effective immediately. You're to collect your things and leave the premises before the night is over. Security will escort you if necessary." Greg opened his mouth to argue, but found no words. His pride and anger were boiling over, but the authority in Patterson's voice left no room for negotiation. Without another word, he stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. Patterson exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair before turning to the sous chef, who had been pretending not to listen. "I'll need you to keep things running smoothly tonight. Samantha will handle the Carter family's table." "Yes, sir," the sous chef replied quietly, his respect for Patterson evident in his tone. As Patterson left the kitchen, he adjusted his jacket and scanned the dining room. Greg's dramatic exit hadn't gone unnoticed. A few diners whispered among themselves, their curiosity piqued. Patterson straightened his posture and returned to his table, but his eyes briefly met James's. There was an unspoken promise in that glance. This wasn't over yet. James sat at the table, his sharp instincts picking up on the unusual movements in the restaurant. Evelyn noticed his furrowed brow and touched his arm gently. "What is it?" she asked quietly, careful not to alarm the children, who were now focused on deciding between the pasta and the steak on the menu. "I'm not sure yet," James replied, his voice low, "but something's happening. Did you see how Patterson walked into the kitchen and how Greg stormed out?" Evelyn nodded, glancing toward the now closed kitchen door. "Do you think it's about us?" she whispered. "Probably," James said, his tone cautious. "And I doubt Greg's going to let it go quietly." Before Evelyn could respond, Samantha returned to their table, carrying a tray of warm bread and butter. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed it on the table, and she avoided making eye contact. "Here you go," she said softly. "I'll be back in a moment to take your order." "Thank you, Samantha," Evelyn said warmly, hoping to ease the young woman's visible nerves. Samantha nodded quickly and hurried off toward the bar. James leaned closer to Evelyn. "She's scared," he said quietly. "Something's going on behind the scenes. It's not just about what happened at the door." Evelyn frowned, her unease growing. "Do you think we should leave?" James shook his head. "Not yet. Let's see how this plays out. Patterson seems to have some control over the situation." As they spoke, Greg reappeared from the back of the restaurant, his face red with anger. He wasn't in his usual position of authority near the hostess stand. Instead, he stood near the entrance, muttering furiously into his phone. James watched him closely, his sharp instincts warning him that Greg wasn't done causing trouble. At his table, Patterson also observed Greg's movements, his expression unreadable. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers lightly against his glass as though waiting for something, or someone. The restaurant's atmosphere felt heavy, the hum of conversations from other diners unable to mask the tension that seemed to ripple through the room. Suddenly, Greg ended his call with a sharp gesture and stormed out the front door, slamming it behind him. James's eyes followed him, but he said nothing. Evelyn shifted uncomfortably, sensing the same unease her husband felt. A moment later, Patterson stood up and walked toward their table. His movements were measured, his demeanor calm but serious. He stopped just short of the table, his hands resting lightly on the back of an empty chair. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice low and steady. "I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to join you for a moment. There's something I think you should know." Evelyn looked to James, who nodded. "Of course," James said, his tone careful. "Have a seat." Patterson sat down, folding his hands on the table in front of him. He glanced briefly at the children who were now quietly nibbling on the bread, before turning his full attention to James and Evelyn. "I want to apologize again for what happened earlier," he said, "but there's more to this than you might realize." James tilted his head slightly, his expression attentive. "We appreciate your intervention," he said, "but I get the feeling this isn't just about us being refused service." "You're right," Patterson admitted. "Greg's behavior tonight was the final straw, but his actions are part of a larger problem. He's been running this place poorly for a long time, and it's taken me too long to address it. Tonight gave me the evidence I needed to act." "What kind of evidence?" Evelyn asked, her voice soft but curious. Patterson hesitated, as though weighing how much to reveal. Let's just say that Greg's discriminatory behavior isn't limited to what happened tonight. I've had reports from staff and customers alike, but I needed to see it firsthand before making any decisions. Your situation forced his hand. James narrowed his eyes slightly, sensing there was still more to the story. And what happens now? Patterson smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Now, we ensure that this restaurant becomes the kind of place where no family has to experience what you just went through. But that might require a more immediate change than I initially planned. Before James could press further, the front door opened again, and Greg stormed back in, followed by two men in dark suits. The room seemed to hold its breath as the men looked around, their gazes landing on Patterson. Patterson's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression remained composed. "It seems the game isn't over yet," he said quietly to James. Then he stood, ready to face whatever Greg had just set into motion. Greg marched toward the center of the restaurant, flanked by the two men in dark suits. His face was a mixture of triumph and fury, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on Patterson. The hush in the dining area was palpable, with curious diners whispering among themselves. Patterson remained by the Carter's table, his posture straight and his expression calm, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation. "Mr. Patterson," Greg called out, his voice carrying an edge of mock civility. "I thought I'd invite some friends of mine to help sort this situation out." He gestured to the men beside him. "These gentlemen are legal advisors who specialize in business matters." James's brow furrowed as he exchanged a glance with Evelyn. The children looked up from their bread, sensing the tension in their parents' demeanor. Patterson, unbothered by the scene Greg was creating, stepped forward to meet him halfway. "Greg," Patterson said evenly, his voice low but firm, "you're digging yourself deeper into a hole you can't climb out of. Bringing in legal advisors over this is not only unnecessary, it's laughable." One of the men in suits cleared his throat, addressing Patterson directly. "Mr. Patterson, as representatives of Mr. Whitman, we're here to ensure that any decisions made tonight are lawful and that Greg's rights as a manager are respected." Patterson let out a dry chuckle. "Greg's rights as a manager? Let me clarify something for the both of you. Greg is not a manager anymore. He's been relieved of his duties as of 10 minutes ago. He's trespassing now, and you're enabling him." Greg's face flushed red. "You can't just fire me without cause. I've run this place for years." "And that's exactly the problem," Patterson snapped, his tone sharper now. "You've been running this place into the ground with your bigotry and unprofessionalism. Your behavior tonight only confirms what I've been hearing from staff and customers for months." The murmurs among the diners grew louder, with heads turning to follow the exchange. Samantha stood frozen near the bar, her hands gripping a tray as though holding on for stability. The sous chef peeked out from the kitchen door, his face a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. One of the men in suits stepped forward. "Mr. Patterson, we'd advise you to proceed with caution. Terminating Mr. Whitman without due process could open you up to legal repercussions." Patterson raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. Due process. Greg's actions tonight were grounds enough for termination. Refusing service to a family based solely on their race is not only unethical, it's illegal. I'd be well within my rights to have him removed by security right now. Greg smirked, his confidence returning. "You're bluffing. You wouldn't dare drag me out in front of all these people." At that, Patterson's smile turned cold. "Try me." The room went silent as Patterson nodded toward the front door. Almost on cue, two uniformed security guards stepped inside, their presence commanding immediate attention. They surveyed the room briefly before walking toward Patterson, who motioned toward Greg. "Gentlemen," Patterson said, his voice steady, "please escort Mr. Whitman off the premises. He's no longer employed here." Greg's bravado faltered as the guards approached him. "This is absurd," he sputtered, backing up a step. "You can't do this. I've built this place. This is my restaurant." "No, Greg," Patterson replied calmly. It's mine, and you've overstayed your welcome. The guards flanked Greg, one of them placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Greg shrugged it off angrily, glaring at Patterson. You'll regret this, he hissed. You think you're so righteous, but you'll see. This isn't over. Patterson remained unfazed, his expression resolute. You're right about one thing, Greg. It isn't over. But it's over for you. As the guards escorted Greg toward the door, the restaurant erupted in a wave of murmurs and whispers. Some diners clapped quietly, while others simply watched, stunned by the unfolding drama. James and Evelyn exchanged a glance, both silently impressed by Patterson's control of the situation. Patterson turned back to the Carters, smoothing his jacket. My apologies for the disruption, he said, his tone polite but tinged with weariness. Now where were we? Before anyone could respond, Greg's voice rang out one last time from the doorway. You're making a mistake, Patterson. Mark my words, this isn't the last you've seen of me. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Patterson sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'll deal with that later, he muttered to himself. Then he turned back to James and Evelyn, his smile returning. Now, let's make sure your evening is truly worth remembering. As the restaurant settled back into a cautious hum of conversation, Patterson returned to the Carters' table. His previously sharp demeanor softened as he addressed them. I appreciate your patience tonight, he began, his tone measured and sincere. This isn't the kind of experience I want anyone to have here, especially a family as dignified as yours. James leaned back slightly, his eyes narrowing. We do appreciate what you've done so far, Mr. Patterson, he said slowly. But I can't help but wonder, why go through all this trouble? You could have avoided all this public drama. Patterson gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as though acknowledging the validity of James's question. You're not wrong, he admitted. It would have been easier to handle this quietly, but sometimes things need to be addressed in the open, especially when they've been ignored for too long. Evelyn tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. What do you mean? Ignored by who? Patterson exhaled deeply, his eyes briefly scanning the restaurant before focusing on James and Evelyn. I bought this restaurant a year ago, he explained. At the time, Greg was already in charge of operations. On paper, he seemed competent, he had the experience, the numbers were decent, and the staff turnover was low. But over the past several months, I started hearing things. Whispers from employees, complaints from certain customers, subtle signs that something wasn't right. Evelyn frowned. But if you suspected something, why not address it earlier? I wanted to, Patterson said, his voice tinged with regret. But Greg was careful. He kept his worst behavior just out of view. Plausible deniability, you might call it. Every complaint I investigated came down to a lack of hard evidence. Tonight, however, he gestured subtly toward the table they sat at. Tonight he finally slipped. His prejudice was on full display, and not even he could spin it. James nodded slowly, his respect for Patterson growing. So, you used this situation to act? I did, Patterson admitted. I've been looking for a way to replace him without sparking a legal mess, and his behavior toward your family gave me the final piece I needed. It wasn't fair to you, and I won't pretend it excuses what happened. But I want you to know that your composure and dignity, in the face of his treatment, made this easier to expose. Evelyn exchanged a look with James, then asked cautiously, And what now? Is this about just getting rid of Greg, or is there something else? Patterson hesitated, as though weighing his words carefully. Then, leaning in slightly, he said, Now, I want to make sure this place becomes something better, not just for the customers, but for the staff who've been stuck under his thumb. That's where I could use someone like you. James raised an eyebrow. Someone like me? He echoed, his tone skeptical. Patterson smiled faintly. You'll understand soon enough. But first, let's finish your meal. I promise the rest of the night will be drama-free. The comment left James and Evelyn exchanging curious glances, both of them uncertain but intrigued. Patterson stood, giving them a polite nod. "Enjoy your dinner," he said, stepping away to allow Samantha to approach with their orders. The young waitress smiled nervously, her demeanor more relaxed now that Greg was gone. As she placed their plates on the table, Evelyn noticed Samantha's hands were no longer trembling. "Thank you," Evelyn said warmly. "You've been wonderful tonight." Samantha smiled shyly. "It's no problem, ma'am. I'm just glad Mr. Patterson was here. Things are going to change now, I can feel it." James watched Patterson return to his own table, his mind buzzing with questions. What did Patterson mean by "someone like you"? And why did it feel like there was more to the story than Patterson had revealed? He decided not to press the issue just yet. For now, he focused on the smiling faces of his children, hoping that the rest of the evening truly would be as calm as promised. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Patterson's plans for them and the restaurant were far from over. The rest of the dinner unfolded without incident. The food was excellent, and the children's laughter lightened the atmosphere at the table. James, however, couldn't shake the subtle undertones of Patterson's earlier words. As Evelyn chatted with the children about dessert options, James found himself glancing occasionally at Patterson, who remained seated at his own table, speaking quietly with the sous chef who had emerged from the kitchen. Whatever they were discussing seemed serious. As the plates were cleared, Patterson rose from his table and approached the Carters once again. His expression was calm but purposeful, as if he had been rehearsing his next words carefully. "I hope you enjoyed your meal," he said with a polite smile. "We did," Evelyn replied warmly. "The food was excellent, and Samantha has been wonderful." Patterson nodded, a flicker of pride crossing his face. "I'm glad to hear that. Samantha is one of our best staff members, and I intend to ensure she and the rest of the team get the support they deserve going forward." James leaned forward slightly, his sharp eyes meeting Patterson's. "You've mentioned moving forward a few times tonight. What exactly are you planning, Mr. Patterson?" Patterson chuckled lightly. "I thought you might ask. Let's just say I've been thinking about the future of this restaurant, and tonight made a few things clearer." Evelyn frowned slightly. "What do you mean by that?" Patterson paused, his gaze shifting briefly to the children, who were happily debating whether to order the chocolate mousse or the cheesecake. Then he looked back at James and Evelyn, lowering his voice. "I don't want to discuss too much in front of your children, but if you're willing to stay for a few minutes after dessert, I'd like to speak with you privately. There's an opportunity here that I think you might find interesting." James raised an eyebrow. "An opportunity for us?" Patterson smiled faintly. "Yes, I think you'll understand once we talk. It's nothing to be concerned about, I assure you. It's simply something I believe could benefit both you and this restaurant." Evelyn looked to James, who gave her a small nod. "All right," James said cautiously. "We'll hear you out." "Good," Patterson replied, his tone satisfied. "Take your time with dessert. I'll be ready when you are." As Patterson returned to his table, Evelyn leaned closer to James. "What do you think this is about?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," James admitted. "But I get the feeling it's more than just smoothing things over after tonight's fiasco. He's got a plan." Evelyn nodded, glancing toward Patterson, who was now speaking with Samantha near the bar. "Do you think we can trust him?" James hesitated before replying. "I'm not sure yet, but he seems genuine enough, and he's clearly trying to make things right. Let's see what he has to say." The children interrupted their quiet discussion with their decision: chocolate mousse for one and cheesecake for the other. Evelyn smiled, signaling Samantha to bring their order. The light-hearted moment helped ease the tension, but James couldn't help feeling that whatever Patterson had in mind would be the turning point of the night. Dessert arrived, and for a brief moment the atmosphere at the table felt like any other family celebration. The children eagerly dug into their choices, their laughter filling the space. Evelyn watched them with a soft smile, but James's focus lingered on Patterson, who now stood near the bar, speaking in hushed tones to a tall, sharply dressed man who had just arrived. The new figure's presence immediately caught James's attention. There was something deliberate and formal in his demeanor that suggested he wasn't just another diner. As James finished his coffee, Patterson turned and began walking toward their table, the tall man following closely behind. The two stopped just short of the table, and Patterson offered an apologetic smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said warmly, gesturing toward the children's nearly empty dessert plates. "Not at all," Evelyn replied, though her tone carried a hint of curiosity. Patterson motioned to the man beside him. "This is Mr. Hargrove, my attorney and business advisor. He'll be joining us for the discussion, if that's all right with you." James exchanged a glance with Evelyn, then nodded. "That's fine." Patterson pulled up a chair and sat down, while Mr. Hargrove stood at his side, clipboard in hand. The restaurant had mostly emptied by now, leaving the Carters, Patterson, and the remaining staff in a much quieter setting. The air felt charged, as though the night was building towards something significant. "Let me start by saying," Patterson began, his tone measured, "that tonight's events weren't just a wake-up call for Greg. They were a reminder for me, too. I've always envisioned this restaurant as a place where everyone feels welcome, a reflection of the community it serves. But it's clear to me now that changes are overdue, and I need people I can trust to make those changes happen." James tilted his head slightly, studying Patterson. "I understand your vision," he said carefully. "But how does that involve us?" Patterson leaned forward, his expression earnest. "It involves you because I see potential in you, Mr. Carter. Potential for leadership, for understanding people, and for creating something that reflects the dignity and strength you've shown tonight. I'm offering you a chance to take ownership of this restaurant." The words landed heavily, drawing stunned silence from the table. Evelyn's eyes widened, and even the children, sensing the gravity of the moment, paused mid-bite to look at their parents. James blinked, leaning back in his chair as he processed what he'd just heard. "Ownership," James repeated, his voice calm but tinged with disbelief. "You're offering me the restaurant?" "Yes," Patterson said firmly. "I've been planning to step back from active ownership for some time now, but I needed the right person to take over. After seeing how you handled tonight's situation, with composure, patience, and dignity, I'm confident that you're the right person." Evelyn spoke up, her voice soft but clear. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Patterson. But we've never run a restaurant before. Why us?" "Because leadership isn't just about experience. It's about character," Patterson replied. "You're smart, resilient, and capable of handling challenges with grace. The operational side can be learned. I'll ensure you have the support and resources you need to succeed. But the heart of a business like this is its people, and I believe you have what it takes to inspire and lead them." James sat silently for a moment, his gaze fixed on Patterson. "This is a lot to take in," he admitted. "You're asking us to take on something huge. What's the catch?" Patterson smiled faintly, appreciating the directness. "No catch. But there is a condition. If you agree, I want you to commit to making this restaurant a true reflection of inclusivity and community. That means overhauling the culture Greg left behind, building a team that reflects your values, and ensuring that no one ever experiences what you went through tonight." Evelyn reached for James's hand, her eyes searching his for an answer. "This could change everything," she whispered. James nodded slowly, still processing. "It's an incredible offer," he said, "but it's not something we can decide on the spot." "Of course," Patterson replied. "Take some time to think it over. I'll have Mr. Hargrove draft the terms and we can revisit this when you're ready." James and Evelyn exchanged another glance, their minds racing. Patterson stood, signaling that the conversation was over for now. "Thank you for hearing me out," he said. "Whatever your decision, know that I respect you both deeply." As Patterson and Mr. Hargrove walked away, James leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Evelyn looked at him, her eyes full of a mixture of hope and apprehension. "What do you think?" she asked quietly. James shook his head, a small, incredulous smile forming on his lips. "I think tonight just became a lot more complicated." The restaurant was nearly empty now, with only a few diners lingering over their drinks, and the staff quietly finishing their tasks. The Carters remained seated, their plates cleared, but their minds racing. The children had fallen silent, sensing the weight of the conversation their parents were having. Evelyn turned toward James, her voice soft but insistent. "What are you thinking? This could be life-changing, James, but it's so sudden." James rubbed his hands together, his eyes distant as he considered the offer. "It's a lot to process," he admitted. "On one hand, it's an incredible opportunity. Ownership of a business like this? It could set us up for life, but on the other hand..." He paused, glancing toward the bar where Patterson was speaking with Samantha and another staff member. "Why us? Why tonight? Something about this feels rushed, like there's more he's not saying." Evelyn leaned closer, her voice dropping lower. "He said he's been planning to step back for a while. Maybe tonight just gave him the push he needed. And honestly, James, who better than us? We know what it feels like to be treated the way Greg treated us. We could turn this place into something truly welcoming." James sighed, nodding slowly. "You're right about that. But it's still a huge responsibility. Running a restaurant isn't easy, and we'd have a lot to learn." Evelyn smiled gently. "We've faced bigger challenges. You're smart, James, and you've got a good head for leadership. We wouldn't be alone. Patterson said he'd support us." James hesitated, his gaze drifting toward their children. "This would change everything for us," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But is it the right change?" Before Evelyn could respond, Samantha approached the table, her expression hesitant but kind. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," she began, wringing her hands nervously. "I just wanted to say, if you do decide to take Mr. Patterson up on his offer, I think it would be wonderful. You seem like the kind of people who could really make a difference here." James raised an eyebrow, curious. "You've been here a while, haven't you, Samantha?" She nodded. "Almost 3 years. It's been challenging under Greg. He wasn't easy to work for, especially if you didn't fit his idea of the right kind of employee. But if someone like you were in charge, well, I think it would change everything." Evelyn smiled warmly at her. "Thank you, Samantha. That means a lot." Samantha glanced toward the bar where Patterson caught her eye and nodded subtly. "If you need anything else, just let me know," she said before retreating to finish her duties. James watched her go, then turned back to Evelyn. "It sounds like Greg's behavior ran deeper than just what we saw tonight," he said. "If we took this on, we'd be inheriting a mess." Evelyn placed her hand on his. "But maybe we'd also be fixing it," she said. "Think about what it would mean. Not just for us, but for the people who work here and the customers who walk through those doors." James exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Let's sleep on it," he said finally. "We'll give Patterson our answer tomorrow. I want to be sure we're making the right choice, for us and everyone else involved." Evelyn nodded, satisfied with his decision. The children yawned, signaling that it was time to head home. As they gathered their things and made their way to the exit, Patterson stood near the door, his expression calm but expectant. "Whatever you decide," he said as they passed, "know that I have faith in you. You're exactly the kind of people this place needs." James nodded, offering a small smile. "We'll be in touch." As the Carters stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the evening still lingered. James looked back at the glowing sign of the restaurant before taking Evelyn's hand. "Whatever happens next," he said softly, "we'll face it together." Evelyn squeezed his hand, and the family walked toward their car, the future ahead of them uncertain but full of possibility. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as James sat at the table, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Evelyn stood by the stove, flipping pancakes for the kids, but her focus kept drifting to James. She could see the weight of the decision bearing down on him, even in the way he absently tapped his fingers on the table. "You've been quiet all morning," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "What's on your mind?" James sighed and leaned back in his chair. "I've been running through every scenario in my head. What if this is too big for us? What if we take it on and fail? What if there's more to this deal than Patterson let on? Evelyn turned off the stove, setting the pan aside as she walked over to him. James, I get it. It's a big leap, and we're not going to have all the answers right now. But I also know that we've never backed down from a challenge. And if there's one thing I'm sure of, it's that you can handle this. James looked up at her, his expression softening. You always make things sound so simple. It's not simple, Evelyn admitted. But it's worth it. Think about what this could mean for us, for the kids, and not just for us. You saw Samantha last night, and you heard what she said. This isn't just about running a restaurant. It's about giving people like her a place where they're respected. James nodded slowly, her words settling into his mind. You're right. It's more than just a business. It's a chance to make a difference. The sound of the children's footsteps interrupted their conversation as they rushed into the kitchen, chattering excitedly about the pancakes. Evelyn smiled and returned to the stove, leaving James with his thoughts. As he watched his kids laughing and teasing each other, something shifted inside him. The fear and uncertainty were still there, but they were outweighed by a growing determination. After breakfast, James stood by the window, staring out at the quiet street. Evelyn joined him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. What's the plan? She asked. James turned to her, a newfound resolve in his eyes. I think it's time to give Patterson our answer, he said. Let's do this. Evelyn smiled, pride and relief washing over her. Then let's make this ours. Within an hour, James and Evelyn were dressed and ready. They left the children with Evelyn's sister and headed back to the restaurant. The drive was filled with quiet anticipation, both of them mentally preparing for the next step. As they pulled into the parking lot, James took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel tightly for a moment before letting it go. We're really doing this, he said, his voice a mix of nerves and excitement. We are, Evelyn replied firmly. And we're doing it together. The couple walked through the restaurant's glass doors where Patterson was waiting at the bar, a stack of papers beside him. He stood as they approached, his smile warm but professional. I had a feeling I'd see you today, he said. James extended his hand, shaking Patterson's firmly. We've thought it over, he said, and we're ready to take the leap. Patterson's smile widened as he nodded. You've made the right choice, he said. Let's sit down and talk through the next steps. As they moved to a nearby table, James glanced around the restaurant. It felt different now. Less like a place they'd been humiliated, and more like a place they could transform. He exchanged a look with Evelyn, who gave him a reassuring smile. For the first time since the offer had been made, James felt a flicker of excitement outweighing his nerves. They were ready to begin. As they sat down at the table, Patterson slid the stack of papers toward James and Evelyn. The documents were neatly arranged, each section marked with tabs for easy navigation. A fountain pen rested on top, gleaming under the soft lights of the restaurant. Patterson leaned back slightly, his demeanor calm but focused. These documents outline the terms of the agreement, Patterson explained. I'm transferring ownership of the restaurant to you, along with all the assets, staff, and operational framework. There's no financial buy-in required. I only ask for two things in return. James, his hands resting on the table, studied Patterson intently. And what are those two things? He asked. Patterson smiled faintly. First, as I mentioned last night, I want this place to reflect inclusivity and community. It needs to become a symbol of what this neighborhood stands for: diversity, respect, and opportunity. Second, I'd like you to keep me on as a silent partner for the first year, not because I want to interfere, but because I'd like to provide guidance and support where needed. Evelyn glanced at James, her expression a mixture of relief and curiosity. That's surprisingly fair, she said. But why are you stepping away? You seem so invested in this place. Patterson's face softened, and for the first time his polished exterior showed a glimpse of vulnerability. I've been in this business for over 3 decades, he said. I built this restaurant from the ground up, and it's been my pride and joy. But the truth is, I'm tired. My priorities have shifted. I want to spend more time with my family and less time managing day-to-day operations. He paused, his gaze meeting James's. But I couldn't just leave it in anyone's hands. I needed to find the right people, people who could carry on the legacy while also making it their own. When I saw how you handled yourself last night, James, I knew you were the right choice. James considered Patterson's words carefully, his fingers lightly tapping the edge of the table. I appreciate your confidence in us, he said. But let's be honest, there's a lot we'll need to learn. We don't have any experience running a business like this. And that's where I'll help, Patterson assured him. You won't be alone in this. I'll provide training, connect you with trusted vendors, and even cover the first 6 months of operating costs to give you a head start. All I ask is that you give it your best effort. James and Evelyn exchanged a long look, communicating silently as they had so many times before. Evelyn's gaze held a quiet confidence, a silent reminder that they had faced challenges before and come out stronger. James finally nodded, turning back to Patterson. All right, he said. We're in. Patterson's smile widened and he extended his hand. Then, let's make it official. James shook Patterson's hand firmly, and Evelyn followed suit. Patterson motioned for Mr. Hargrove, who had been waiting quietly near the bar, to join them. The lawyer approached with a professional efficiency, explaining each section of the documents in clear, concise terms as James and Evelyn reviewed them. As they signed the final page, Patterson raised his glass of water in a symbolic toast. To new beginnings, he said warmly, and to the future of this restaurant. James and Evelyn raised their glasses, a wave of determination washing over them. This was it, their chance to turn an unexpected night into something extraordinary. As they clinked their glasses together, the weight of the decision settled into their hearts, but so did the hope that they could create something truly special. With the paperwork signed, the reality of their decision began to set in. Patterson clapped James on the shoulder warmly and said, "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. You're officially the new owners of this restaurant. The staff will be informed today, and I'll be here over the next few weeks to guide you through the transition." James felt a mix of pride and anxiety as he looked around the dining room. The restaurant suddenly seemed larger, more imposing, as the responsibilities it represented loomed in his mind. "What's our first step?" he asked, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. Patterson smiled. "The first step is meeting the team. You'll want to get to know the people who make this place run. Most of them are hard-working, good-hearted folks. Unfortunately, Greg's leadership created a toxic environment for some of them, so you'll need to rebuild trust." Evelyn nodded, already formulating ideas in her head. "We'll need to listen to them, understand their concerns, and make it clear that things are going to be different moving forward." "Exactly," Patterson agreed. "And speaking of the team," he glanced toward the bar where Samantha and a few other staff members stood, their curiosity palpable. "Why don't we start with an introduction?" James and Evelyn stood, smoothing their clothes as they followed Patterson to the bar. Samantha smiled nervously, her hands clasped in front of her, while the other staff members exchanged uncertain glances. Patterson cleared his throat, gathering their attention. "Everyone," he began, his tone authoritative yet warm. "I'd like to introduce you to James and Evelyn Carter, the new owners of this restaurant. Starting today, they'll be taking over operations." The announcement was met with a mixture of surprise and cautious optimism. Samantha's smile widened, and she was the first to step forward. "It's wonderful to meet you both," she said sincerely. "I'm Samantha, and I've been here for a little over 3 years." James shook her hand, appreciating her openness. "Thank you, Samantha. We're looking forward to working with you." A middle-aged man with a chef's apron approached next, his hands dusted with flour. "I'm Marco, head chef," he said gruffly but not unkindly. "I've been here since the place opened. If you need to know anything about the kitchen, I'm your guy." Evelyn smiled warmly. "We're grateful to have someone with your experience, Marco. We'll definitely be leaning on you as we get up to speed." As more staff members introduced themselves, the atmosphere grew lighter. Some seemed genuinely excited about the change in leadership, while others remained guarded, clearly waiting to see how things would unfold. Patterson watched the interactions carefully, a satisfied look on his face. When the introductions were complete, Patterson turned to James and Evelyn. "The team's a good one," he said. "They'll come around once they see your vision in action. Now I'll leave you to get settled. Remember, I'm just a phone call away if you need anything." James extended his hand. "Thank you for trusting us with this. We won't let you down." "I know you won't," Patterson said, shaking his hand firmly before heading toward the exit. As the door closed behind Patterson, James and Evelyn stood together, surveying the restaurant. It felt surreal. Just last night, they were patrons being refused service. Now, they were the owners, tasked with transforming the very place where they had experienced humiliation. Evelyn touched James's arm, her voice soft but confident. "We've got a lot of work ahead, but I know we can do this." James nodded, a determined look in his eyes. "Let's get started." The journey had just begun, and while the road ahead was uncertain, they were ready to face it together. The following days were a whirlwind for James and Evelyn. Patterson had arranged for a series of transition meetings to familiarize them with the restaurant's operations. There were vendor contracts to review, inventory systems to learn, and financial reports to analyze. Each new piece of information seemed to pile higher onto their plates, but the Carters tackled it together, leaning on each other's strengths. James spent much of his time in the back office poring over spreadsheets and ledgers. Numbers weren't his strong suit, but he was determined to understand the business inside and out. Evelyn, on the other hand, took a hands-on approach with the staff, spending hours in the dining room and kitchen, observing their routines and offering help where she could. On their third day, Evelyn found Samantha near the bar, organizing drink menus. The young waitress still seemed hesitant, as though she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Evelyn approached her with a warm smile. "Samantha, can I have a moment?" Samantha straightened, nodding quickly. "Of course, Mrs. Carter. Please call me Evelyn," she said gently. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done these past few days. Your willingness to step up has made this transition so much smoother." Samantha blushed slightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Thank you. I'm really glad things are changing. It's already starting to feel different around here." Evelyn's smile grew. "That's what we're aiming for. And I want you to know that if you ever have any concerns or suggestions, my door is always open." Samantha nodded, her smile growing more confident. "I'll keep that in mind. Thank you, Evelyn." Meanwhile, in the kitchen, James was meeting with Marco, the head chef. The kitchen bustled with energy as cooks prepped for the lunch rush, but Marco had carved out a moment to discuss the menu. "Greg wasn't a fan of change," Marco said bluntly, flipping through a binder of recipes. "He wanted everything done his way, even when customers asked for something different. If you're open to it, I've got some ideas for refreshing the menu." James leaned against the counter, intrigued. "What kind of ideas?" Marco's eyes lit up as he pulled out a sheet of handwritten notes. "We could add some seasonal specials, maybe incorporate dishes that reflect the diversity of the neighborhood. People love feeling like their culture is represented on the menu." James nodded thoughtfully. "I like the sound of that. Let's set up a tasting. If the team's on board and the dishes work, we'll make it happen." Marco grinned, his enthusiasm palpable. "You've got it, boss." By the end of the week, the Carters started noticing small but significant changes. Staff who had been quiet and withdrawn were beginning to engage more openly. Diners lingered longer, chatting with waitstaff and commenting on how welcoming the atmosphere felt. Even the regulars, who had initially been wary of the new ownership, seemed to be warming up. One evening, as James and Evelyn walked through the dining room, Samantha stopped them. "I just wanted to show you this," she said, holding up a comment card. "It's from a customer who came in tonight." James took the card and read it aloud. The new energy in this place is incredible. It feels like a community now, not just a restaurant. Evelyn's eyes glistened with pride. That's exactly what we wanted. James handed the card back to Samantha with a smile. Thank you for sharing this. It means a lot. As the night wound down and the last customers filtered out, James and Evelyn sat together at one of the tables, looking around at the quiet restaurant. It still felt surreal, but it also felt right. This is just the beginning, James said, his voice steady but filled with hope. Evelyn nodded, resting her hand on his. And we're building something real here, together. The restaurant's transformation was well underway, but the road wasn't without its bumps. On a busy Friday evening, as the dining room filled with customers, James noticed a familiar tension in the air. Marco had been unusually curt with the kitchen staff. Orders were coming out slower than usual, and a few servers appeared frazzled. Evelyn, sensing the shift, quickly approached James near the host stand. "What's going on?" she asked quietly, scanning the room. "I'm not sure yet," James replied, his eyes narrowing as he watched a server rush back to the kitchen. Her face flushed. But something's off. Without hesitation, Evelyn stepped into the kitchen, where the normally orchestrated chaos had turned into outright confusion. Marco stood by the stove barking orders as two cooks scrambled to catch up on missed tickets. A server stood near the counter, shifting nervously as she waited for an overdue order. "Marco," Evelyn called out, her voice firm but calm. "Can we talk for a moment?" Marco looked up, his frustration clear in his furrowed brow. "It's not a good time, Evelyn," he said, gesturing toward the chaos around him. "We're in the weeds." "I can see that," Evelyn said, stepping closer. "But we need to figure out why." Marco sighed, lowering his voice. "We're short-staffed tonight. One of the line cooks called out at the last minute, and Greg never let me hire backups when I asked months ago. Now we're stretched too thin." Evelyn nodded, her expression understanding. "Okay, what do you need from me to get through tonight?" Marco hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to such a direct offer of help from management. "Honestly, if someone could run food or help with plating, it would free up my team to focus on the cooking." "Done," Evelyn said without hesitation. She turned and stepped back into the dining room, scanning for James. When she spotted him, she waved him over. "We need to step in," she said quickly. "Marco's short-staffed and the kitchen's falling behind." James nodded, rolling up his sleeves. "Tell me what to do." The two of them jumped into action. Evelyn helped plate dishes, moving with surprising speed and efficiency, as she placed garnishes and checked orders. James ran plates to tables, using the opportunity to interact with customers, apologizing for delays with a smile and a charm that seemed to ease their frustration. Samantha, seeing the Carters working alongside the staff, rallied the rest of the servers. "Let's pick it up, everyone," she called, her voice ringing with confidence. The energy in the room shifted as the staff followed her lead, their movements growing more coordinated and purposeful. Within an hour, the backlog was cleared, and the rhythm of the restaurant returned to normal. The kitchen staff, though exhausted, looked relieved as Marco gave a thumbs up to Evelyn. "Thanks for stepping in," he said, his tone softer now. "I didn't think we'd pull through tonight." Evelyn smiled. "We're a team, Marco. That's how it works." James, meanwhile, was at the last table of the night, personally delivering an order of dessert. The older couple seated there smiled warmly as James set down their plates. "You don't see many owners doing what you just did tonight," the man remarked. "It says a lot about the kind of place you're building." James straightened, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Thank you. That's what we're aiming for. A place where everyone feels cared for, staff and customers alike." As the last patrons left and the staff began cleaning up, the exhaustion of the evening hit James and Evelyn. They sat together at the bar, sipping glasses of water and watching as Samantha and the others worked with renewed energy. "You know," James said, leaning back against the bar, "this wasn't exactly what I imagined when we took this on." Evelyn laughed softly, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Me neither. But I wouldn't change a thing. James reached for her hand, squeezing it lightly. "We're making it work, Ev. One step at a time. And we're not alone," she added, glancing toward Samantha and Marco, who were chatting animatedly about menu ideas for the coming week. "This team, they're starting to believe in what we're building." James nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "Then let's keep giving them a reason to believe." The next week brought a new wave of changes as James and Evelyn began implementing their vision for the restaurant. Inspired by Marco's suggestion, they introduced a rotating menu of seasonal dishes that celebrated the cultural diversity of the surrounding neighborhood. The announcement was met with excitement from the staff and curiosity from customers, who eagerly asked about the upcoming dishes. James also made good on another promise, to rebuild trust among the staff. He organized a team meeting, gathering everyone in the dining room after closing one evening. The staff, ranging from longtime employees like Marco to newer hires, sat around the room, their expressions a mix of skepticism and cautious optimism. James stood at the front of the room, his hands clasped in front of him. Evelyn stood beside him, offering silent support. "First, I want to thank all of you," James began. "The last week has been a whirlwind, but your hard work has kept this place running. Evelyn and I couldn't have done it without you." A few murmurs of appreciation rippled through the room, but most of the staff remained quiet, waiting to see where James was going. "We know that the past leadership didn't always make this an easy place to work," James continued. "And I'm sure some of you are wondering if things are really going to change. Let me assure you, they are. Starting today, our focus is on building a workplace where everyone feels valued and respected." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice warm but firm. "That means open communication. If you have concerns, ideas, or feedback, we want to hear it. We're here to listen and to work with you to make this place better for all of us." Marco raised a hand, his gruff voice breaking the silence. "What about staffing? We've been stretched thin for months. If we're going to handle these new menu changes, we'll need more people in the kitchen." James nodded. "You're absolutely right, Marco. We've already started reaching out to candidates and we'll be hiring additional staff in the coming weeks. We want to make sure no one is overworked or unsupported." Samantha chimed in next, her tone hesitant but hopeful. "What about Greg's rules? He was strict about how we handled customers even when they were unreasonable. Will that change?" Evelyn smiled gently. "Yes, it will. We trust your judgment, Samantha, and everyone else's. If a customer is being unfair or inappropriate, you'll have our full support to handle the situation respectfully but firmly. You shouldn't have to endure mistreatment just because you're wearing an apron." A ripple of relief passed through the room. Slowly, the walls of doubt that had surrounded the staff began to crack. Samantha's smile grew more confident, and even Marco leaned back in his chair, his posture more relaxed. James glanced around the room, his voice steady as he delivered his final message. "This isn't going to be an overnight transformation. It's going to take time, effort, and patience. But Evelyn and I are committed to this place, and to all of you. Together, we're going to make this restaurant into something we can all be proud of." The meeting ended with a renewed sense of purpose among the staff. As they dispersed to finish closing duties, Samantha lingered behind, approaching James and Evelyn with a smile. "I just wanted to say," she began, her voice soft but sincere, "thank you for everything. It feels good to finally believe in this place again." James smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That means more than you know, Samantha. We couldn't do this without you." As James and Evelyn walked through the quiet dining room later that night, locking up for the evening, they couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time it felt like they were truly moving forward, not just as owners, but as leaders. Evelyn glanced at James as they reached the door. "We're building something special here, aren't we?" James nodded, his expression resolute. "Yes, we are. And it's just the beginning." Months passed, and the transformation of the restaurant became evident in every corner. The once tense atmosphere had given way to a warm and inviting energy. The staff worked as a cohesive team, bonded by a newfound trust and mutual respect. The menu changes were a hit, drawing in a diverse crowd that appreciated the restaurant's homage to the community's cultures. Word spread quickly, and reservations were often fully booked weeks in advance. James and Evelyn had settled into their roles, their initial fears replaced by a sense of purpose. Evelyn oversaw the front-of-house operations, ensuring that both staff and customers felt cared for. James, who had grown confident with the business's financial and logistical aspects, made it a point to connect with every team member and customer who walked through the doors. One evening, as the restaurant hummed with activity, a man stepped inside. He looked around with a sheepish expression, hesitating near the door. James, who had just finished checking in with the kitchen, noticed him immediately. It was Greg. Evelyn joined James near the entrance, her expression unreadable as she too recognized their former adversary. Greg approached slowly, his usual swagger replaced by an air of discomfort. "James, Evelyn," he said, his voice quieter than they remembered. I heard about the changes you've made here, and I wanted to see it for myself." James exchanged a glance with Evelyn, then addressed Greg directly. "It's good of you to stop by," he said evenly, his tone polite but firm. "We've been busy making sure this place reflects the values it should have had all along." Greg nodded, his gaze dropping slightly. "I can see that. The staff looks happy, the customers. It's not like when I was here." He paused, his voice faltering. "I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you that night, and for everything else. I know I can't undo what I did, but I've been trying to make some changes in my own life." Evelyn softened slightly, her voice calm but measured. "We appreciate the apology, Greg. What happened that night pushed us into something we never expected, but it also gave us a chance to build something better." Greg nodded again, looking genuinely remorseful. "If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. I mean that." James studied him for a moment, then offered a small nod. "The best thing you can do is take what you've learned and do better moving forward." Greg gave a faint, grateful smile. "I will." As Greg left, James and Evelyn returned to the dining room, where Samantha waved them over to a table of regular customers who wanted to compliment the latest special. James looked around the restaurant, taking in the laughter, the chatter, and the satisfied faces of both the customers and the staff. It was a far cry from the tense, hostile environment they had walked into months ago. "This is it," Evelyn said softly, her eyes scanning the room. "This is what we dreamed of." James took her hand, squeezing it gently. "It's not just a restaurant anymore. It's a place where people feel like they belong." As the night wound down and the last of the diners left, James and Evelyn stood together near the door, watching the staff clean up. The glowing sign outside cast a warm light across the dining room, a symbol of the new life they had breathed into the space. "Ready to head home?" Evelyn asked, resting her head on James's shoulder. "Not quite," James replied, a small smile playing at his lips. "I just want to soak this in for a moment." Evelyn nodded, her own smile mirroring his. Together they stood quietly, taking pride in the journey that had brought them here. The challenges, the doubts, and even the pain of that first humiliating night had led to this, a thriving restaurant, a united team, and a shared dream that had become a reality. As the lights dimmed and the doors locked behind them, the Carters stepped out into the cool night air, their hearts full of hope and determination. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they could face it together. The future was theirs, and they were ready. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. See you in the next video.